Congrats! You're at the stage in your book when you are ready to edit. But the skills of an editor are different than that of a writer, and even if you're a very good writer, sometimes you cannot be that great of an editor. Now, maybe you're considering hiring someone to edit, and that's fine, but even so, you still need to self-edit it before you send it out to them. Here are 12 strategies that you should use when editing your manuscript. I think it will definitely level up your editing skills. 1. The text transplant. I'm honestly surprised that more writers don't use this technique. I don't know whether it's because no one's ever taught it to them, but it's one of the best techniques that I've ever found. So here's what you do. You pick a particular element that you want to work on revision for. Maybe it's chapter titles, maybe it's metaphors and similes, maybe it's dialogue from one particular character. And what you do is you open up a new file, Word file, Google Docs, whatever, and you take all those elements from your book and put it into this new file. Now, when you look at them in the harsh, cold light of this new file, where it's not surrounded by all the other text in your novel, you're going to be able to see it in a new light, which means you're going to be able to see all its flaws, right? You're going to look at all your metaphors and similes and be like, you know, that's kind of a cliche, or that one's not as good as I thought it was. On the other hand, the ones that really stand out for you, you're like, man, I am a genius. I'm going to keep that in the book for sure. What this isolation does is it really helps you see these elements of the story without the scaffolding and buttressing of all the rest of your novel, so you can evaluate them more clearly. And yes, when you do this, the goal is either to change maybe the chapter titles that aren't working so well, or the chapter titles that don't match your other chapter titles, or if you're looking at dialogue from one particular character, what are the lines of dialogue that they say that don't sound like them, or they sound sort of neutral, like anybody could have said them? How do you revise those lines of dialogue so it really sounds like they are the only one that could have possibly said this line of dialogue? 2. The sensory scan. So sometimes a certain sense can fall out of your book. For instance, the sense of sound or the sense of taste. What you want to do is comb through a chapter looking for situations where you use one of the 5 senses, and then mark somewhere like, okay, what senses did I use in this chapter? Did I use any smells? Did I use any taste? Did I use the sense of touch or of sight or of sound? If you find a chapter is relatively low in all of the senses, well, then you have a project now, don't you? Like, get to work, put some senses in there. Revise your book so they can smell your book and taste your book and really immerse themselves in the world of your book. On the other hand, you might have a chapter that does really well with the senses, but then there's just one sense that you never do. Maybe in that chapter, or maybe in the entire book. Maybe your book doesn't have any smells in it. Okay, well then it's time for an entire novel-long project where you go through looking for what would be the scent in this scene. What would this character smell on another character? What could be a whiff of perfume that they get while walking down the street? Or what could be the smell of trash in an alleyway? What this exercise does is it helps you fill in all the gaps in your book where the senses might have dropped out. And what this will do is it will help make sure that the reader is fully engaged in the world of your book on every page. Self-editing strategy number 3, the scissor shuffle. What I want you to do is to print out a couple chapters of your book, maybe make it small font or something so you're not wasting too much paper. And now what you should do is you should take scissors and you should cut it apart based on sections, right? Based on scenes, or based on, you know, a paragraph is sort of a standalone paragraph, but cut it apart according to sort of naturally divided sections. And then what I want you to do is I want you to start to switch it up chronologically. And here's a pro tip here, write like a shorthand name on the top of each section, like what happens in that section, just so you can see really easily, so you're not always like reading the whole section. It's a pro tip. Your goal in this is to see sequences that are not based in chronology. Sometimes slavishly, we just write books chronologically. Well, this happened, and then this happened according to the clock. Next, this happened. I mean, is it wrong? No. Does it work? Yes. Are there other ways to tell stories? Absolutely. Sometimes a scene which is halfway through your book, you got to take it and put it at the beginning and say, I wonder what my book would feel like if I started with this scene. And cutting the scenes apart onto different sheets of paper is just a very physical and tactile way of playing with the order of your story. Now, if you do this exercise right, what you're going to find out is some sections that you thought were good seem to be less essential than you thought they were. Okay, great. Maybe you should delete those. I think you might also find that certain sections are therefore not as exciting. You're reading over it and you're like, I don't really know where to put this in the sequence. It's like necessary, but not like super necessary. It's more of like a connective tissue scene. That also might be something you're like, okay, instead of putting this in another place because it doesn't seem to fit anywhere, what if I just drop it? Can I fit that information into a different scene somewhere else? Well, there's no sense in having two scenes if I can make one scene do the work of two scenes. I almost named this section the Tarantino exercise because if you've watched a number of Quentin Tarantino films, he often tells the story out of order and he makes it work marvelously well. So just remember that the first thing, it's designed to grab attention and build curiosity, even if that section doesn't start the book chronologically. And the things toward the end, toward the climax, are the most important events in your story, even if they happen first or in the middle of your story. Number 4, the first and last. What I want you to do is to look at the first paragraph and last paragraph of every chapter. These are very crucial points, right? This is when the reader decides whether they're interested in this book still. The end of a chapter is when the reader decides, am I going to keep reading? Am I still interested? The beginning of the chapter is when a reader decides, am I interested still in this book? Do I really want to read the rest of this chapter? So these are really crucial moments. What you should do in revision is take an extra eyeball to them and just scrutinize them and say, does this do the work that I want it to do? Now, one strategy is to go back to the first strategy of the text transplant and take out all the beginnings of each chapter and all the endings of each chapter and look at them in isolation and see, okay, does this work as a chapter opening? Like, does it grip the reader? Does it make it interesting to read this story? And for the chapter endings, ask yourself, what about this makes the reader want to continue to turn the page to the next chapter? If you can get the first and last part of each chapter right, I mean, that is so much of the work of the writer. Even if the middle sort of is a little bit muddled, man, you rescue it by the end of the chapter, you're gonna get the reader through your book. Now, since you're at the editing stage for your book, you might be close to publishing your book. And so I would want to tell you to check out Print Nation. They're a great resource to help you print your book. And I suggest them because I've been really disappointed with Amazon over the years with messing up the color of my cover, with messing up the alignment of my color, and in general with the printing quality of KDP is not impressive. So if you want a higher quality for your book, check out Print Nation. Some stuff that they can do that other people can't do is foil detailing. What is foil detailing anyway? It's basically the raised element on a cover that you can feel with your fingers. For example, on Susanna Clarke's Piranesi novel, if you rub your finger across this section, you can literally feel the ridges, which is really cool. Something else they can do is glossy interior pages. If you're publishing a children's book or a cookbook or an art book or a coffee table book, you want those images to be very high quality. When you're ready to publish your book, visit Print Nation. The link is in the description below. The fifth strategy to level up your editorial skills is the Godfather Story. So most books are written standing on the framework of previous books. This is just an obvious truth, right? We're not reinventing the wheel every single time we write a book. We're looking at previous books and stealing their structure or their framework. So when you write a book, I think it's very helpful to have a type of Godfather story, a story that inspires you, a story that's similar to your story in some way, that you can use their structure or other things and use it to inform how you're writing your own book. And if you don't have a model, well, you could be in trouble, right? You're trying to reinvent the wheel and you're not learning from what's already been made. Now, how does this help with editing? What you need to do is you need to look at this book, look at the grandfather book, look at this book that serves as inspiration, and ask yourself, well, it doesn't have this type of scene. Do I need that type of scene in my book? What it does is it teaches you what is necessary and what is unnecessary, so that way you can go back to your book and delete some scenes, or perhaps realize that, oh, there's a really crucial scene that I need to add that this other book has. I need to recreate that in my own book. If you don't have a Godfather story to sort of refer to, then you're kind of operating in a vacuum, like you're operating on your instincts. And a lot of the time your instincts are right. Some of the time your instincts need a little help. So the things you can look for in a Godfather book are things like, how do they end the book? Count the number of characters in your Godfather story, and then count the number of characters in your book. Literally count them. And then see whether there's a wide divergence. Count the number of scenes they have in a chapter, or the number of chapters they have overall. It doesn't have to be a hard and fast rule, but at least it gives you a baseline idea of, here's how that book is constructed. It was successful. I like it. Okay, maybe I'll construct my book in the same way. Sixth strategy is the blank page. Sometimes I find that when I'm wrestling with a particularly difficult section, maybe it's a paragraph or maybe it's a page, I've edited again, again, and again, I just can't make it work. Sometimes the best thing to do is not to continue to edit it. Sometimes the best thing to do is to open up a completely new blank file, read it once, get in your brain what it was trying to communicate, and then write it from scratch. Don't use a single phrase you used before. Sometimes you discover something new that was missing in the scene, and you're like, oh, that little tweak helps this whole scene work so much better. Sometimes you make it more concise. Sometimes you expand it. But the trouble is when editing is we're too tied to what has come before, right? Sometimes the solution is not to continue to tinker with it and try to revise and fix it. Sometimes the solution is to jump into completely new territory and just write it again from scratch. Seventh revision strategy is the word cloud. So there are all sorts of word cloud websites out there that will allow you to upload a file and it will give you a visual representation of some of the most common words that you use. I find this is really helpful because sometimes I don't know that I've used a word a bunch and then it will appear in the word cloud as being like ridiculously large and I'm like, really? That's one of my most frequently used words? Now there's going to be some unhelpful stuff like and or the, like you're like, okay, that doesn't help me at all. Of course I'm going to use that word a lot. But sometimes you find a word that's really empty that surprises you. For instance, I hate the word something. I think it's an empty calorie of a word. It very rarely contributes to the meaning of any sort of scene. It's just that filler that we put in as we're writing because we don't know what else to say. So if you find sort of empty calorie words like that in your fiction, man, a word cloud can reveal that to you and then you can go ahead and cut as many of those as possible from your manuscript. A strategy for self-editing is snow blindness. So if you've ever been skiing or snowboarding without sunglasses for a day, you know that snow blindness is a real thing. The sun is reflecting off that ice and snow, and by the end of the day, it's hard to see. Your retinas are literally being burned. You can get snow blindness as a writer. You have looked at the manuscript for so long, you can't see things which should be obvious. Unfortunately, there are no sunglasses for this type of thing, right? But there are solutions for you. So my tip to reduce snow blindness is to do these 4 things. 1, change the margins. Simply the act of changing where lines break and where lines start can rejigger your brain to help you see things in a new light. Second thing, change the font. Change it to anything. I mean, it should still be readable for you, but changing it will just help you see the words afresh in a new light. Another thing you can do if you don't want to change the font is to change the font size. Sometimes making it 1 point bigger or 2 points bigger can just make you see a sentence in a new light. It feels fresh and new in a way. And then lastly, change the line margins. If you've been single space, change to double space or triple space. It will literally make you feel like you're reading a new book, particularly if you do all 4 of these things. You're gonna be like, did I even write this? It feels so different. That, my friends, means you have snow blindness. Now, there's one other thing to do to reduce snow blindness, and that is to just shove it in a drawer. Let it sit for a while. Don't look at it for a while. When you come back to it, it will feel fresh and more original. For example, there was this one time I wrote a story and I had forgotten that I wrote it. And so I discovered it on my computer and I started to read it and I'm like, I don't remember writing this. And so I was excited to read the rest of it because it felt new to me. Like I had completely removed my snow blindness. I was eager to find out what the ending was. And then I got to the ending and I'm like, dang, John, you're good. Like that was a fantastic ending. Good job, you. It was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had as a writer, reading my own work and just not remembering it. Now, obviously, there are limits to how much you can reduce snow blindness most of the time if you don't have a bad memory like me. And if you do need an extra set of eyes, remember we do have a copy editor at BookFox. She is absolutely amazing and she will see all the stuff that your eyes pass over. I'll put a link to that in the description below too. Strategy number 9 is the proxy polish. Sometimes we spend so much time editing our own manuscript that we get that snow blindness, right? Sometimes the right step in that point is not to put it away, but instead edit someone else. Because when you edit someone else, their mistakes seem so clear to you, right? You're like, oh, missing word here, or this sentence doesn't make sense. And you feel like a genius when you're reading someone else's work. You're like, man, I can see this so clearly. But what editing someone else's work does is it really gives you perspective. And when you're critiquing someone else, you get better at critiquing yourself. The more you can identify certain patterns, like this type of ending doesn't really work, or when you portray a character in this way, readers aren't going to enjoy that. The more you can take those lessons and apply them to your own fiction, it helps you to see your own work better. I mean, I've just seen this in my own life, right? I have edited edited hundreds of novels, hundreds. And I take all the stuff I tell other people and then I tell it to this guy when I'm writing a book and like, what would I say if this is someone else's book? I would say this. Oh, well then I better follow my own advice, shouldn't I? The 10th strategy is the first look. I find that often when we're editing our manuscript, we start every single day at chapter number 1. So chapter number 1 gets an inordinate amount of attention. Like you have just carefully crafted every single phrase and sentence and you think it's absolutely perfect. But you know, poor chapter 17, you've edited that guy once, twice, it hasn't gotten the same level of attention. So what I want you to do is when you start your workday, don't start at chapter 1, start at chapter 17 or whatever is the ill-begotten redheaded stepchild that you have ignored so far in your novel. I think if you can start your editing day fresh and just tackle that piece later on in the book, you'll have a much better sense of what to delete and what to cut and what to change. Number 11, the adverb auction. This is a little tweak, but it's so very helpful. Just look at all of the adjectives you have on a page. And a lot of them end in ly, but not all of them, right? Anything that modifies a verb is an adverb. So comb through your manuscript looking for adverbs and just ask yourself, okay, which one of these can I sell? Which one can I get rid of? I think you'll often find that the meaning of a sentence is often just as powerful if you cut that adverb as if you keep it. And what adverbs often are doing is they're trying to like hold the reader by the hand and guide them through something you think is too complex for them. But you need to treat the reader as though they're smart, because guess what? Your readers are smart. They're gonna get it, right? They're gonna get it from the overall context of what the emotion is that that speaker is speaking with. You don't need to say, she said angrily, because the dialogue is obviously angry. So treat the reader like they're smart, cut as many adverbs as you can, and what remains will be stronger. 12, the read aloud. Most of the time when someone tells you to read your work aloud, they're telling you to look at the small things, right? To look for a missing word or a misspelling or something that just sounds off. That's good advice. Yes, do that. What I'm telling you here is something a little bit different. I want you to read aloud looking for big picture stuff. When do you get bored when reading out loud? That might signal that the pacing is off in this certain section, or you should end the chapter a little bit sooner. Where are there too many words with not enough plot progression? Or you find yourself as you're reading out loud, you're thinking, when's the next thing going to happen? Well, that's a sign that some revision needs to happen there. In other points, you just might find like, oh, this section, it doesn't have, maybe there's no tension between the characters here. And as I'm reading, I'm feeling like, this is kind of a wishy-washy scene. It's not really working. Okay, once again, that's great information. Use reading out loud as a developmental editing tool and not just a copy editing or line editing tool. It can do both. I'm just saying I don't often hear about it being used as a developmental, so I want to encourage you to make sure that you know that it can do that too. All right, I hope you really enjoyed all those ways to become a better self-editor. And just as a reminder, if you're looking for high quality printing services, check out the link of Print Nation below.